Welcome to the debate. Today, we're diving deep into the science behind Shinrin-yoku, or forest bathing. And, this is a phenomenon where the anecdotal evidence of well-being is now really being matched by some robust physiological data. Our source material confirms a clear outcome. Time spent in a forest environment significantly enhances human anti-cancer immunity, specifically through increased natural killer cell activity. And that's coupled with a simultaneous measurable drop in stress hormones.
The physiological benefit is, it's a scientific fact at this point. The question really isn't if it works, but how it works, and more specifically, what mechanism really holds primacy in driving this immune boost.
Exactly. When we look at this enhancement, this measurable spike in our body's innate defense mechanisms, I'm going to argue that the primary mechanism is the direct cellular and molecular action of inhaled volatile organic compounds, what we call phytoncides, acting specifically on those NK cells. The forest is, it's essentially providing a natural airborne immunotherapy.
See, I come at the causation from a fundamentally different perspective. While those chemical inputs, sure, they certainly act as triggers and are part of the overall sensory bouquet, I contend that the primary mechanism, the one explaining the overall magnitude and the persistence of the immune boost, is the profound systemic reduction of chronic psychological stress. Stress hormones are potent inhibitors of immune function. The forest environment facilitates this massive systemic shift, essentially removing the inhibitory brake that stress places on the NK cells, which allows them to recover their full potential.
Okay, let's look at the bedrock evidence for that direct chemical influence. My position is really based on the idea that the chemical inputs aren't just some ancillary benefit, they're the active ingredient. We have clear in vitro studies, so tests done outside the body, using human NK92MI cells, which demonstrate that exposure to isolated phytoncides like alpha-pinene, 1,8-cineal, and D-limonene significantly boosts the cell's cytolytic activity. And this activation is dose-dependent. That is a direct molecular response, not some generalized systemic calm.
And I acknowledge the strength of that molecular data. I do. It confirms that the chemicals are indeed immune activators. But, laboratory conditions often oversimplify these incredibly complex systemic responses. In a living human, these cells aren't just floating in a petri dish with a pure chemical dose. They are bathed in a neurohormonal soup that's dictated by our stress levels.
But the specificity of the activation moves us beyond simple activation. The mechanism is molecularly precise. This enhanced cytotoxicity is directly linked to the induction, or the manufacture, of key anti-cancer proteins within the NK cells themselves. We're talking about perforin, granulysin, or GRN, and granzyme A and B. These are the cytotoxic tools, the chemical artillery our NK cells use to induce programmed cell death in abnormal or infected cells. The forest trip doesn't just wake up the existing NK cells, it equips them better. And what's more, field research shows this correlation perfectly. These phytoncides are detected in high concentrations in forest air, but are, virtually absent from city air, correlating precisely with the spike in NK activity only after a forest visit.
That strong correlation, though, it begs the question, are the phytoncides the primary cause of the immune rebound, or are they just a trigger in an environment that simultaneously dismantles the primary obstacle to immune function, which is, of course, stress? It's a fact that chronic psychological and occupational stress actively and measurably suppresses immune function, including NK cell activity.
And my argument is that the measured reduction in stress hormones is simply another facet of the phytoncide's effect, not the primary mechanism of immune enhancement itself.
I have to disagree there. The forest environment produces a profound and measurable restorative physiological shift. Field studies consistently demonstrate that forest bathing dramatically decreases critical stress markers, urinary adrenaline and noradrenaline concentrations, and salivary and serum cortisol levels. The reduction in urinary adrenaline after even a short single-day forest trip is statistically significant. This isn't just relaxation. This is a clear action on the autonomic nervous system. It's suppressing sympathetic, that's the fight or flight activity, and profoundly enhancing parasympathetic, the rest and digest activity. So if you are chronically stressed, your immune system is perpetually throttled. The force removes that throttle, and the system naturally springs back to life.
Okay, I see the compelling logic in that argument. I do. But let me introduce a piece of evidence that suggests the chemical agent is the necessary and sufficient trigger for both the immune and the endocrine response. Consider the studies where healthy subjects were exposed only to vaporized Hinoki cypress oil, a potent source of phytoncides, while they were sleeping in an urban hotel room.
Right, an important targeted experiment, trying to isolate the olfactory factor from the total sensory experience.
Exactly. This targeted chemical exposure, without the visual, the tactile, or the full atmospheric experience of the forest environment, still significantly increased NK activity, and it simultaneously decreased urinary adrenaline and noradrenaline concentrations. This is crucial. The chemical agent initiated both responses. If the bioactive molecule triggers both the NK boost and the stress relief, well then the phytoncide itself remains the core mechanism, which initiates a beneficial cascade that just includes stress reduction.
That is a powerful result, I'll grant you, but I remain skeptical of the interpretation that the NK boost is independent of the stress relief. I think the key lies in the sequence of events. The decrease in stress hormones is likely intrinsic to the VOC's action via the nervous system. We know that nature's scents influence emotional responses, stress pathways directly through the olfactory nerve, which is a rapid conduit to the limbic system. The chemical exposure lowered adrenaline and noradrenaline, which then allowed the NK cells to recover. The effects are inseparable, sure, but the fundamental requirement for weeks-long immune health isn't just activation, it's the reversal of chronic stress-induced suppression. If the NK cells are suppressed by a stress signal and a scent removes that stress signal, the primary functional benefit is still the release from suppression.
But if the systemic stress reduction were the dominant factor, why would we see such specific molecular changes? Why not just a generalized boost in immune markers? The fact that we have a dose-dependent increase in perforin and granzymes, these highly specific cytotoxic proteins, strongly implies that the phytoncides are docking with cellular receptors and initiating a specific biosynthetic pathway, rather than just being a relaxing smell that clears the environment for some generic immune recovery. We're talking about gene expression being modulated by these chemicals.
I'm not convinced that the gene expression is solely a direct result of chemical binding. Gene expression is also highly sensitive to the neuroendocrine environment. When the sympathetic nervous system is suppressed, the body shifts metabolic resources. A restoration of hormonal balance provides the necessary energy and signaling environment for the cells to finally mount that defense. The VOCs might be the key, but they are turning off the stress signal, which is the systemic lock holding the immune system back. Let's pivot to a challenge that the pure, direct chemical absorption model struggles to explain adequately: the duration of the effect. The research shows the remarkable longevity of the immune boost, NK activity, increases lasting for at least 7 days, and in some metrics up to a full month following just a single 3-day, 2-night trip.
Yeah, if we look at the half-life of airborne terpenes, we would expect the initial chemical concentration to vanish very rapidly.
Precisely. If the effect were purely a transient biochemical boost from these short-lived airborne compounds, wouldn't we expect the NK activity to revert quickly, maybe within 24 to 48 hours? The duration points toward a much deeper, systemic, and restorative physiological resilience that's built through profound stress reduction and autonomic shifting, which takes a significant time to decay. It speaks to a reboot of systemic function.
I'm not convinced by that line of reasoning because the persistent effect is measured at the molecular level. It's not just inferred as resilience. The longevity is a direct consequence of lasting cellular changes induced by the exposure. The forest bathing trip significantly increases the numbers of NK cells themselves. This isn't just about how active existing cells are, it's about increasing the standing army.
So you're arguing it's a form of natural bioprogramming, a cellular investment.
That is exactly what the data suggests. We see a lasting increase in the population of lymphocytes that are expressing those specific anti-cancer tools: perforin, GRN, and GRAB. This is not a transient switch being flipped. It is a measurable, lasting increase in the population of cytotoxic cells and their specialized machinery. This strong molecular evidence points to a direct, lasting cellular reprogramming that was initiated by the phytocides, and that creates the longevity independent of the subsequent reintroduction of stress. The stress reduction may make the subject feel better, but the cellular machinery is being built by the chemistry.
But this brings us back to the mechanism of input. To argue against the simple chemical absorption hitting a circulating NK cell, we have to acknowledge the complexity of the olfactory system as a critical neuroimmune interface. We see fascinating research using model organisms, like zebrafish, which shows that olfactory sensory neurons, OSNs, are electrically activated by external inputs, like pathogens. This rapidly initiates neuroimmune responses in the olfactory bulb.
Right, you're referring to the rapid, centralized activation of defense systems, including microglia and the enrichment of antimicrobial programs in the brain itself.
Yes, specifically the increased expression of neuropeptides like PAC-HAP, that's pituitary adenylate cyclase activating polypeptide, which is central to regulating inflammation and modulating the stress response in the central nervous system. This suggests the sense of smell acts as a neuroimmune signaling mechanism, where VOCs might be acting as regulatory compounds that prepare and regulate the brain's immune defense. This is a top-down regulatory model mediated by the neuroendocrine axis, which really complicates the narrative of simple, direct NK cell interaction out in the periphery.
That's an interesting point about the central neuroimmune link, though I would frame its role differently. The complexity of the regulatory system doesn't negate the necessity of the chemical trigger. We have to return to the comparative field studies, which act as the ultimate ecological filter. Comparing a forest trip to a city tourist visit with matched activity levels showed that the city trip, which presumably offered visual stimulation, mental distraction, and some basic relaxation, it did not increase NK activity, anti-cancer proteins, or decrease stress hormones.
So the city trip failed. Okay, that proves the forest is unique. But it doesn't settle the debate over whether that uniqueness stems from the removal of stress factors, the noise, overcrowding, pollution, or the active presence of phytocides.
Well, it proves that the non-negotiable prerequisite is the presence of the key agents. The mechanism might be incredibly complex, involving nervous and endocrine systems interacting with the chemical inputs, as you suggest. But the sheer physical and atmospheric advantages of the forest, lower pollutants like sulfur dioxide, nitric oxide, carbon monoxide, compared to urban environments, simply enabled the critical chemical agents, the phytoncides, to be delivered effectively and consistently. Without that high concentration of the chemical agent, the NK cells remain unstimulated. The forest atmosphere is the delivery system for the immunotherapy, making the phytoncides the primary cause.
But the atmospheric quality is precisely part of the stress reduction mechanism. The lack of noise, the visual fractal patterns, the lower pollution, these all contribute synergistically to down-regulating the sympathetic nervous system. The phytocides are part of the total sensory package that signals safety to the brain. If we could achieve the same deep parasympathetic shift without phytocides, I suspect the NK cells would still rebound significantly. I believe we have simply identified the most potent combination for initiating systemic healing.
And I still maintain the chemical cocktail is responsible for the specific and lasting cellular investment, which is the quantifiable anti-cancer benefit.
And that specific investment is only possible when the inhibitory signals of chronic stress are silent.
To summarize my position, the weight of the molecular evidence is, for me, overwhelming. Forest-induced immune enhancement results from a strong, dose-dependent, and lasting induction of specific cytotoxic proteins, perforin and granzymes, and an increased population of NK cells. These powerful, measurable anti-cancer effects are directly tied to the presence of phytocide VOCs. This identifies a clear molecular target that elevates the forest experience from palliative relaxation to genuine biochemical intervention.
And I maintain that the profound simultaneous drop in stress hormones like adrenaline and cortisol, coupled with the documented shift towards parasympathetic dominance in the forest, suggests that the primary driver is the reversal of chronic immune suppression. The forest environment, through its combined sensory and chemical inputs, provides systemic restoration, The systemic restoration is what allows the cellular investment, the manufacturing of new NK cells, to be sustainable for weeks, and that is the true therapeutic benefit.
It's clear that the material presents a powerful feedback loop. The chemical environment initiates the response, while the relaxed state permits its full, lasting expression.
Absolutely. The material confirms that the profound physiological benefits of forest immersion are achieved through a powerful and necessary interplay between the bioactive chemical environment and the human stress response. And this offers us a deep insight into neuroimmune regulation and multiple pathways for therapeutic design.